Yeah, it's first time here at Wireless Field Day. We're excited to be here. I think Stephen had mentioned we're the first non-access point vendor to be here, so we're honored to be invited. One little thing, you referenced the socks. So we got some socks we gave to everybody here in-house, but we want to take care of the people joining in online too. So there's a tweet out there if you follow us at @cloudpath_net. If you retweet it, just saying that we're live on air now at Wireless Field Day, we'll get you, we got 100 pairs of socks to give away, so we'll get your info and get them mailed out to you. So over the next couple hours, we're going to go through kind of the case for moving away from passwords on Wi-Fi and towards certificates. And in doing so, we're going to break it into kind of 4 sections. First, the introduction on Cloudpath, give you a little background on where we came from, what we've done over the last several years, and also what we see going forward. The second section will go into PEEP at scale. So what we've learned over the last, in some cases 7, and then even beyond Cloudpath, 12 years of deploying PEEP in large scale environments and kind of the lessons we've seen in those cases. Then we'll go into TLS specifically, touch on a little bit what it looks like. One thing I will note is in the conversation, I think the security benefits of TLS are well documented, so I won't rehash all that. But what I really want to drive home is the usability and the manageability aspects, that once you cut over to certificates, all 3 of those aspects, usability, manageability, security, just all become much cleaner. And then in the 4th section, we'll wrap up with some slides on Express Connect enrollment system, kind of at the 40,000 foot view, and then we'll jump into an actual system. I got one idling that we've spun up a new VM. And so we'll go from the first time hitting the UI and actually set it up to a live working system. So a little background on us. Cloudpath was founded in 2006, came to market in 2007 with the idea that personal and unmanaged devices could be put on a secure network, whether that was at the time WPA, now WPA2 Enterprise, or wired 802.1x, just as easily as being left on traditional unsecure networks. And from a marketing perspective, I try to minimize the marketing here, but we use the phrase "your network enabled," and we see that as being important because we really view it as it's your network. We want to drop in and work the way you want us to. We do that through standards. Those are the things that allow us to be deployed with top 10 wireless vendors today. And we really look at it as we're coming in and enabling capabilities you'd like to have, but have always had trouble getting to. And so we really want to focus on bringing secure Wi-Fi to all, not reserving it for a few devices. A couple years ago, when we first introduced the enrollment system, we were named Best of Interop for wireless and mobility. And there was an announcement come out yesterday from Mobile World Congress that we were named one of the finalists for their awards here next month. And so something like 680 products were submitted, and I think in our category there's 4 finalists. Quotes are always a little bit funny, or a little bit odd to use because customers always say good things if they like you. But I thought this one was a little bit funny. When Aruba bought Avenda and renamed it ClearPass, they came here to introduce the product, and in their explanation of what it was, they referred to this type of technology having this massive impact on the networks it had been used in. Up to that point, we were the only ones doing this, so presumably, we think that they must have been referencing, our track record. In doing so, they also said we should learn from these people that deployed 802.1x WPA2 Enterprise at scale. These are the people that have done that, or a subset of them. In the early days where a lot of our customers were in higher education because that's where personal devices started. Today we have 6 out of 8 Ivy League schools, huge institutions like University of Texas Austin, most of the Texas system, University of Florida where they do both wired and wireless. And then all over the board. So we don't want it to be just for big people, so we also have very small schools. So we kind of cover that full spectrum. And over the last couple years, as personal devices have moved out of education and into every other industry and vertical, we've followed suit. And so today our customer base is all over the board in terms of size, geography, industry. when customers pull us in, there's usually one of three burning needs they have. And they break into these three buckets. So the first one's kind of Active Directory or LDAP users with their personal devices. So kind of classic BYOD, whether that's an enterprise situation with employees or education scenario with students and faculty. And in those cases, the key thing is being able to use their Active Directory credentials to self-service, automate the provisioning of their device, get it on the network, and ultimately get it flagged as being different than an IT asset so it can be treated appropriately. The second bucket is guests, contractors, partners, kind of everybody outside of Active Directory or LDAP. And so when you look at the original 802.1x spec, it sort of had two assumptions in it. One was all the devices would be highly managed, so they'd be on GPO or group policy. And the second one is users would exist somewhere. They'd be in Active Directory or LDAP. And those were two barriers from the very beginning we wanted to break down. So we could bring it out to all users, those being internal users as well as external users, as well as all devices, IT assets, as well as personal. So the second bucket's kind of everybody outside the traditional enterprise. And this is kind of the realm of traditional guest servers. So we have all the same sort of functionality, sponsorship, one-time passwords, email, SMS, Facebook, social media type stuff. But at the end of the day, you have the option of leaving them on the OpenSSID authenticated, but we prefer to move them over to a certificate-based SSID. So we can give them a certificate that differentiates them as being different than your other users, customize the time length, all that sort of thing. And then in this space, outside of kind of the traditional guest server realm, there's some interesting things going on with enterprise roaming. With Hotspot 2.0 coming out, we're starting to see service providers move towards providing additional encrypted service, either as just an enhancement to what they're already doing or as an additional service offering. And the third one kind of in retail situations, we get into loyalty programs where, we've always treated customers as, guest access, OpenSSID. We've designed it around least common denominator. So we said, a person's here for 15 minutes one time. We'll onboard everybody the same way, based on those parameters. In reality, your valuable customers are the ones that are coming into the store once a week, once a day. Your contractors, like in a hardware store scenario, that are coming in a couple times a day. And in those cases, we know who they are. We've captured their, whatever you want to know, click-through agreement or additional criteria. So we can go ahead and burn them in and let them have longer access, either as part of a loyalty type membership or just as, for being a customer. The third one is non-domain IT assets. So as you buy iPads, Android tablets, whatnot, if you want to burn them in as IT assets, we certainly take care of those use cases too. A lot of times when you see BYOD reference, it's always around, the cost justification, that somehow it's going to reduce costs. We think that's kind of the uninteresting aspect of it. It's sort of replacing the IT-owned hammer with a personally owned hammer is not that interesting. What we find interesting is just the ability to optimize computing down to that individual level. It's something IT could never do. They had to standardize at the department level. That became about reducing costs. With personal devices, we see people making those choices to optimize on their own. And the value of that's magnified. A few years ago, it would have been replacing XP with XP. Just no value in doing so. Now you've got multiple device types, form factors, OSs, applications, so they can really tweak it down to their specific role and even integrate it with their external life, outside of work. And so what we see happening is there's this tipping point where we've crossed the threshold. Now it's more valuable, there's more value to be created by optimizing the experience than than cost savings based on standardization. So we see that as kind of the fundamental underlying thing that's interesting about BYOD or just personal devices in general. And so it really becomes, in your environment, whether you're an education institution or an enterprise, how do you go about capturing this incremental value from all the devices that are available? And so we see that kind of the burning need is the ability to assimilate these devices into the environment on a scalable, secure, easy, sustainable model. And so to do that, we frame what we do as automated device enablement. And we see that kind of as a combination of two traditional areas. So over the last 7 years, we've done onboarding. You see more people cropping up in that space. From our experience over the last 7 years, we kind of know where the limitations of onboarding are. We can drive a lot of the costs out of IT, but we can't drive a lot of the churn out of the user experience. And so to us, that's kind of where onboarding kind of crosses over and really needs to go to ADE, or device enablement. The second bucket is certificate management. Everybody knows the traditional problems with PKI. It's just, the old joke about the first step is building a building. There's huge costs involved with the initial spin up. And then beyond that, once it's operational, it comes down to distribution of the certificates. Works well if you're in a GPO environment. Once you're in personal devices, being able to automate the distribution is important. The second one is automating the life cycle. So, in the domain, when devices go away, you can have ways of figuring that out and dealing with it. Now you need that same type of capabilities on the other side, personal devices. And so traditionally, security, and in this sense, when I say security, I really mean like encryption and wireless security, in general has been reserved for IT-owned assets, or at least high-value assets. What we're trying to do, is bring that across the full spectrum, so it's as easy to use a secure Wi-Fi for a short-term guest as it is a long-term guest, partners, contractors, business partners, so forth, BYOD, and of course carry that on into IT assets and so forth. So we do that with a product we call the Express Connect enrollment system. It's all about providing self-service automated onboarding for all user types, as well as both personal and IT assets, so all users, all devices. At the end of the day, we're provisioning a unique certificate, burning it into the device. So now we have a unique identifier on that device that we can tie back to information that we gathered during the enrollment process. So we know who it is, what device it is, what hurdles they jumped through to get on the network. Did they jump through enough just to get internet access, or did they jump through some additional to get internet plus email access, or did they jump through some additional to be treated like an IT asset? All those sort of things. Do so without IT involvement. It's always been the hindrance of security, is it works well in a lab environment. How do you push this out to the masses? And as I touched on, we gather all that information, so you have this rich history of who's on your network, why they're there, when the last time you saw them was, and all that sort of thing. And since it's all standards-based with WPA2 Enterprise, 802.1x, X509, it just drops into your existing infrastructure. So it's, and so that wraps up the first section, which is just some background on Cloudpath. And so in the next section, we'll go into PEEP at scale and kind of the lessons we've learned from that.
Quick question, Kevin.
Yeah.
There's not a single operating system that you don't support now, right?
So when we talk about supporting clients, we sort of break it into two categories. And so our end goal is we want everybody to, if they're authorized and authenticated and jump through the hurdles, to be able to get on the network, assuming you want to allow that particular type of device. And so we break that into two groups. We have the devices that we can do automatically. So that's things like Windows back to XP, Mac back to Leopard, Android, iOS, Ubuntu, Fedora. And then there's a second bucket of things where they don't have APIs or they don't let code run on them and so forth. And so those we can handle through kind of the manual process. But like in this case, we're able to, in like PEEP scenarios, we can get them on. We don't prevent them from getting on. It's sort of one of the underlying questions a lot of times with tradition of NAC is people deploy it and they say, okay, well, you only support 5 OSs. That means when there's a 6th one, that user can't get on the network because there's not a good way to handle that. Since we're standards-based, as long as the device can do it, we'll get them on. Some devices we can do that very automated. Some devices like Chromebook right now is one example. We can get them the certificate. We can, based on your configuration, generate custom instructions to walk the user through it. And so we don't prevent them from getting on the network.
I just had a Twitter question was, do you have your own certificate authority or do you integrate with other people's PKI that's already in place?
Both. Yep. And I'll dive into that later, but standards are very much integral in what we've always do. And so all the way back to 2007, we've supported TLS with the Wizard. we were tying, initially we were tying into other people's third-party CAs. After a while, we saw people struggling with that, so we created what we called the Microsoft integration module that allows you to put a DLL on a web server, and then we can bridge into Microsoft CA very easily. And so then if you wanted to pipe it into your existing CA, fine, that was one option. If you wanted a drop-in solution, we had the Microsoft integration module. And then we saw, both of those cases really were limited to, and I'll go into this more later, like one policy. So it was still user-based policy. You couldn't really get into device-by-device basis. They had unique certificates per device, but we didn't decide what certificate to give them based on anything other than username and password. And so with the ES, we're able to bring all that work that people did building their PKI, drop it in. At the same time, if you have it, great, we'll tie into it. We have Radius server on board, so if you don't have one, just point to us. At the same time, if you have an existing Radius server, great, just move the CAs over there. OCSP will talk back to us to make sure they haven't been revoked and so forth.